Happy Hump Day. I'm so sorry. As you can see, I'm not as put together as I usually am because at work today, I was outside for a few hours and it wore me out. I am so tired. I am starving. I am so hungry. I just got out of the shower and I'm in the kitchen. It's 7 o'clock and I have no clue what I am going to fix. I also need to make groceries. But who was going to a grocery store after I got off work? Not me. Not me. So I'm here. I'm going to scrape together something. Cereal, no milk. I have no clue what I'm about to eat. But anyway, I hope y'all are doing well. But I'm in a talking mood. That's weird. So when I am tired for some reason, I get to run in my mouth about stuff. So let's see. What do I have in here? I'm about to make a poor man's dinner. I got some stew beef, like my daddy likes to say. And I got some egg noodles. That's what it's gonna be. That is what it's gonna be. Cause I don't have nothing else in me. I just don't. I don't. That's what it's gonna be. And it's a big can. Oh. I thought it was a little can. Well, it's gonna have to do. It's gonna have to be. Cause I just don't know. But anyway. So while I fix this here food, y'all wanna chit chat? You see me with my Longwood shirt on, Longwood College shirt. And I started thinking, as we get towards the end of the summer, we feel a little shift happening. Kids are headed back to school. Teachers are getting their school supplies together. And I've been seeing on TikTok, all these people going to college and fixing up their dorms. Can we talk about that real quick? Cause what is up with all these dorm room makeovers? I'm up here like, is this HGTV or is this a college dorm room? These kids have headboards and designer rugs. They got little coffee stations. I have seen full-size couches in these dorm rooms. I had a bean bag chair. That's what I had. A bean bag chair. And these kids have couches. And plus, when I was in school, I was barely in my room. But we're not gonna talk about that. I had places to go. Either I was in class or I was hanging out with my friends. My room was basically somewhere where I went to sleep and change clothes. But anyway, I digress. But seeing everybody prepare to go back to school, it got me to thinking about something. There is a certain time of the year that naturally feels like we are starting over. Be it New Year's, the beginning of the school year, or even fall. It just feels like a new beginning. There is something about this time of year that makes people stop and think. Okay, what am I doing? What do I need to change right now? What is the rest of the year gonna look like for me? And maybe it's because summer is coming to an end. We have some time to slow down and think just a little bit more. Or you could be one of those people where you say to yourself, I just can't do this anymore. Something's got to change. And that's what I want to talk about today, starting over. Because I think that we all have done that more times than we like to admit. I know that I have. We often start over in our finances, careers, our health journeys, or maybe you start a new relationship. And sometimes we just start over with ourselves. We look at our life and think, okay, well, let's start this over again. Okay, let me try this again. But here's the part that sometimes I don't even get. Why is it that we do keep starting over? What makes us excited about a new beginning? But then somewhere along the way, we start to lose momentum. And I'm guilty of this. I'll say, oh, this time I'm gonna do things differently. Only to find myself back in the exact same position that I was before. And for me, sometimes when I start over, it feels like I've somewhat failed. Because there is a difference between starting over and feeling like you wasted your life. Let's talk about it. Okay, so I lied. I have now switched to a turkey burger because somebody has a birthday coming up and I am not trying to eat beef stew and noodles because one thing about me, I can look at a noodle and blow up. So we're going to stick to a turkey burger. I am going to fix some fries, but they're potatoes. They're good, right? They're going to be good tonight. Okay. So it took me a long time to realize this one thing, but I think it is pretty important and deep. Starting over is not a sign that you have failed. Let me repeat that. Starting over does not mean that you have failed. Starting over sometimes is what life simply requires. Life changes, people change, circumstances change, and you yourself change. For instance, the men that I liked at the age of 25 are not at all the same type of man that I like at 45. They're two totally different types of men. Shoot, if we want to keep it real, the men that I dated at 35 are not the men that I like now. And I know y'all remember this from my earlier videos that even career, I did not figure out what I was supposed to do with my life until later on. I went back to school to get my master's after being out of school for almost 20 years. Starting over is a good thing. That relationship that you thought would last forever may not last. That dream that you were so excited about 10 years ago may not excite you anymore. And sometimes we don't know how to deal with that because we are, especially my generation and maybe some millennials, we are conditioned to finish what we start. For example, my parents and possibly yours, my parents specifically, were in their careers for 30 years. That's a long time to be in one job, in one position, doing the same thing day after day after day, but they did it and they passed that down to us. And generally, that's good advice, right? But there are times when finishing something is just not the goal. Sometimes the goal is learning that you have outgrown something. And there's a difference between quitting something because it's difficult and walking away because you've realized that this is not for you. And those two things can look the same on the outside, but internally, two totally different things. One comes from avoidance and the other comes from growth. And I think we need to become better at knowing the difference. Sometimes we are afraid of being labeled a quitter, that we stay in places that we've already been released from. We stay because we don't want to admit that we're wrong. We stay sometimes because we've invested money or time. We stay because people know us as this person. And we stay because we may feel embarrassed if we just walk away. A lot of times we're not even staying because it's right. We will stay because we are afraid of what people are going to think about us. That's something to think about. What if the thing that we are calling starting over is actually changing direction? But there's another side of starting over that I want you to think about. Sometimes we don't actually start, we just wait. And I've done this before. I will tell myself that I'll do something, but I'll say, just not yet. And to me, not yet makes perfect sense. But sometimes not yet can become a lifestyle. And I think part of the reason is because there is a very comfortable feeling about keeping a dream in your head. As long as a dream is a dream, it's perfect. You imagine yourself writing the book. I know that I have started a book. I started a book 10 years ago. It's been 10 years now that I started writing a book. No. You can imagine everything you ever wanted to do. But the moment that you actually start, that is when it becomes real. And real things are messy sometimes. They require decisions. They can expose what you don't know. They force you to deal with disappointment. And sometimes we'd rather deal with a beautiful dream than an imperfect reality. That may be uncomfortable to admit, but I think that is true. Sometimes we're not waiting for the right time, we're waiting to be ready. And those are not the same thing. There may not be a time when you are completely ready to do anything. There is no perfect time. In the Bible, it talks about watching the wind and waiting for the perfect conditions before planting. And the idea is simple. If you're constantly watching for the perfect time or condition, you may never plant anything. And that is life. There is always going to be something that makes you hesitate. The question isn't whether everything is perfect or not. The question is whether you've prepared enough to take the next step. Because faith isn't reckless. But wisdom is not supposed to be an excuse not to move. And at some point, you have to make a decision. And then there's another problem. We start and then we quit. I think a lot of us quit not because we're lazy, but because we get tired of not seeing the results we expected. I see this in my everyday life, especially with exercising. So I can get motivated and say, all right, this is it. I'm gonna get back on track. I start exercising, I make better choices, I'm trying to be consistent, and then nothing seems to happen. Well, not literally nothing, but y'all know what I mean. I'm looking in the mirror 2 weeks later, and I'm like, girl, what is going on with your body? And then that's when the little voice inside of my head say, what's the point? You still look like that. What's the point? Because we want our effort to produce visible results quickly. We want evidence to show that what we are doing is working right now. But I've had to remind myself that just because I can't see the results right now doesn't mean that the work isn't working. My endurance could be improving. My body can be getting stronger. I'm building discipline. I'm creating a habit. There could be progress going on that the mirror is just not showing me yet. And I think life is like that. You could be doing all the right things and still not see immediate results. You could be praying every night about this same thing and nothing has changed in your life yet. You work on yourself constantly, but you still have bad days. You're doing the work, but nobody seems to notice. And that is where a lot of us quit. And it's not necessarily because we don't want to do it anymore, but because we're tired of being in the middle. The beginning is always exciting because there's possibility. And then the end is always good to see because you see where all of your hard work has paid off. But that daggone middle is repetitive. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then you have to trust that something is happening before you can see it, before you can believe it. And maybe that's the real test. Not whether you can start, but whether you can keep going when starting isn't exciting anymore. And maybe some of us are doing the exact same things in other areas of our lives. We are constantly always looking for another fresh start when all we really need is the courage to stay with the process long enough to see what it can produce. Maybe you're not failing, maybe you're frustrated, or maybe you are simply in the middle. And the middle requires something that motivation can't give you. It requires patience, discipline, and sometimes faith. All right, so now that I have my food in the oven, well, my fries are in the oven, so while I wait for that, I'm gonna continue to talk. So now I'm gonna talk about something that may be a little difficult. What happens when you are the reason you have to start over? Because sometimes it's not circumstance. Sometimes it's us. We made the decision, we ignored the warning, we stayed too long, we didn't follow through. We knew better and still did it anyway. And now we're sitting thinking, how in the world did we get back here? And that kind of disappointment really does hit differently because disappointment in other people can hurt. But when we disappoint ourselves, that is a different kind of hurt. You know exactly what happened. And sometimes we just don't acknowledge our mistakes. We turn the mistake into an identity. This used to be my thing. I am so stupid. Or I used to say this one a lot. I can never get this right. But there's a difference between saying I made a bad decision and saying I'm a bad person. One is accountability and the other is condemnation. And this is where grace becomes more than just a church word. Grace allows you to tell the truth about yourself without believing that your worst decision is your entire identity. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. And yet Jesus still had a conversation with Peter afterwards. Jesus did not pretend that the denial did not happen. And he also didn't decide that Peter was automatically disqualified because of it. And I think that's something that we need to understand. Grace doesn't say nothing happened. Grace says something happened. Now, what are you going to do with it? That's where growth begins. New every morning. Think about that. Not every January. Not new when you finally get your life together. Not new when you stop making mistakes. Every morning. It's kind of odd because sometimes we act like a new beginning is something that we have to earn. Oh, once I get my life together, I'll try again. But that's backwards. You don't get yourself together, then receive grace. You receive grace and then get back up. Yesterday you messed up. Today you have another opportunity. Yesterday you made the wrong decision. Today you can make a different one. Yesterday you gave up on yourself. Today you can make another step. That is what new mornings give you. Don't get it twisted. It doesn't erase yesterday. It gives you another opportunity to decide what you are going to do with yesterday. And I think that's where grace becomes so powerful. But grace doesn't mean that we keep repeating the same cycle. If we're constantly starting over, at some point we have to ask ourselves, what am I not learning? Because if I don't examine that pattern, I will keep repeating that over and over and over again. Different situation, same behavior. Different person, different man, same problem. Different year, same cycle. You feel me? And that is when starting over really isn't starting over. It's just going around in the same circle again. So maybe our goal shouldn't be to just ask God for another chance. Maybe it's to ask him, what do I need to understand this time? That's a different prayer. And this is where Philippians chapter 3 comes in. Paul talks about forgetting what is behind and pressing towards what is ahead. Now, I don't mean that means forgetting about what happened in the past. Paul had a past. He knew exactly what he had done, but he understood that he couldn't move forward while constantly negotiating with yesterday. And some of us are exhausted because we are trying to rewrite the past. And you know, I've been guilty of asking myself these questions too. What if I had stayed? What if I had left sooner? What if I had made that phone call? And when I wrote this down, I thought this was funny. At some point, we have to stop asking ourselves questions that we will never get the answer to. Reflection is useful. Regret can teach you. But there comes a point where you've learned what you needed to learn and you have to move on. You cannot change yesterday. You can only decide what yesterday is going to mean for tomorrow. And this is the hard part that a lot of us need to come to terms with, is that sometimes moving forward means accepting that you aren't going to have the exact life you imagined. And that's hard. I was telling you guys last week that when I found out I could not have children, I grieved for years. I thought that I would have 3 kids running around the house. But that was not my life. I made decisions along the way that could have contributed to me not having those things. Those are the decisions that I made, but I cannot live in yesterday. There may be a career that you thought you would have, a relationship that you thought would last, opportunities that you thought would come to you by now. And back then, I was so busy grieving the life that I didn't have that I was not living. There is a whole life that we are missing because we're grieving the life that we thought we would have. Your life may not look the way you thought it would, but that does not mean that there is nothing left to live. And this is why I love Isaiah chapter 43. God said, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing." A new thing. That's important. Because sometimes we think about starting over. We want God to give us back exactly what we lost. We want the same opportunity, the same relationship, the same dream, the same version of ourselves. But what if God isn't trying to take you backwards? What if He is doing something new? And that's harder to recognize because you've never seen it before. You keep looking for what is familiar while something different is developing right in front of you. And that's why maybe starting over can be so uncomfortable. You're not rebuilding the old life. You're building something that you've never lived before. And this brings me to my next point. And I believe everybody needs to hear this. It's never too late. I know somebody's watching this right now and saying, "Oh, I am too old to be starting over, child." And I feel you on that. I feel you. But hear me out. Too old for what? Serious. Who made that rule that a certain age is too late for anything? Now, I'm not saying the age doesn't matter. Of course it matters. We have different responsibilities and mentalities at certain stages of our life. But getting older does not mean that your life is over. It means that you've lived long enough to know things you didn't know before. And there's value in that. Maybe you didn't start your business at 25, but now you're 45. It's not too late for that. Maybe you didn't go back to school at 30, but you're going at 50. It's not too late for that. Your timeline is not broken just because it doesn't match someone else's. And as y'all know, social media does not make it any easier. We are constantly watching everybody else's life. You see the promotion, you see the house, you see the relationship, you see the children, you see the engagement, you see the vacation, and suddenly you feel behind. But here's what I want you to remember. You don't know their entire story. Do I have to replay last week's message to you? You don't know them people. And more importantly, you should never measure your life against someone else's. That's not healthy, mentally or emotionally. You do not have to catch up to someone else's life. You have to pay attention to where you're going. Maybe your life took a bit longer to get to a certain place. That does not mean that it's less valuable. I have taken a plenty of wrong turns in my life. But I'm here to tell you, that does not mean if you take a wrong turn, that does not mean you cannot find your way. And that's okay. You're still here. And as long as you're still here, there is still something ahead of you. Okay, so what do we actually do? Because you know my biggest pet peeve is looking at videos and nobody gives any practical ways to get through certain areas in your life. So let's get into it. If you're really gonna start again, start with honesty. Before you jump into something new, Sit with what happened the last time. What didn't work? What part did you play? What did you learn? And don't give yourself an easy answer. Because if you don't understand the old pattern, you can carry it into a new season. A new job won't fix the same insecurity. A new relationship won't fix the inability to communicate. A new year won't fix the same problems you fail or you try not to examine. Sometimes the thing that needs to change is how you're showing up. And once you understand that, don't try to rebuild yourself all in one weekend. We tend to do that too. We get motivated and all of a sudden we're going to change everything at one time. No, slow down. Choose the next right thing. Do that, then figure out the next thing. This is how real change happens. Because it's not usually through one big moment. It's through small decisions that you will do over and over and over again, and eventually your life starts looking different. And here's something else. Your new beginning is not always going to look exciting. Nobody may clap for you. Nobody may even notice, and that's okay. Not everything needs an announcement. Some things need time. Some growth happens where nobody can see it. You may quietly rebuild your finances, quietly work on your health, quietly build your confidence, quietly get closer to God, quietly walk away from something that is not good for you. And maybe that's actually better, because when nobody is watching, you get to figure out whether or not you're genuinely doing it because you want to change or because you want people to see you changing. That's a different kind of growth. And some of the most important work that you will actually do will happen when nobody is applauding. All right, so those fries are really starting to play with my stomach, so let me give you my final thoughts. If you are starting over right now, I want you to stop being ashamed of it. I thought in some parts of my life I would be further along than what I am right now. I thought I would have it figured out. I thought I would be married. I thought I would have children by now. I thought at 40 I wouldn't be changing careers. But here we are, and that's okay. Starting over did not mean my life was over. It meant something was changing. So if you're ever in that situation, instead of asking, why am I back here? Start asking, what am I supposed to learn while I'm here? That's a different question. Because maybe this season isn't about you getting to where you thought you would be. Maybe it's teaching you how to become the person who can handle where you're going to go next. And sometimes that kind of growth does not feel like progress while you're going through it. So if you need to start again, start again. But don't leave your wisdom behind. Bring what you've learned. Bring what you've experienced. Bring your mistakes, your faith. Bring it all with you, because you are not the same person that started the first time. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the first attempt was wasted. Maybe it was preparation. Maybe that ending wasn't punishment. Maybe it was redirection. Maybe that failure wasn't the end of your story. Maybe it was a chapter. And maybe this next chapter is going to look very different. You don't have to be who you were 5 years ago. You don't have to stay somewhere strictly because you've invested time or money into it. You don't have to punish yourself because you've made mistakes. And you don't have to believe that because something didn't happen when it happened, that it will never happen. Your life is not over because the timeline changed. Sometimes your timeline changes because you've changed. And again, that's okay. So wherever you are right now, if you've been thinking about starting over, I hope this gives you permission to do it without shame. You are allowed to begin again. You are allowed to change direction. You are allowed to admit that something did not work. You are allowed to learn, to grow, and to try again. But most importantly, you are allowed to believe that there is still something ahead of you, because there is. If this conversation spoke to you today, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you're starting over right now, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. You don't have to tell me your whole life story. Just say, I'm starting again. Sometimes there is power in just saying something out loud. And come back next week, because we are going to continue to have these conversations about faith, life, growth, purpose, and figuring it out together. Until then, don't be focused on what didn't happen, that you miss what still can. Your story is not finished. And sometimes what feels like an ending is simply the moment that you finally get the opportunity to begin again. Give yourself some grace. Take the next step. Trust God with what you cannot see yet. And remember, you were given this life because you were strong enough to live it. Until next time, I love you all. I am going to eat my food. Bye for now.